When a family home was described as a slaughterhouse, it rocked the community and investigators. But it turned out this wasn't the first attack committed by the killer.
I heard one of the ambulance people say there's one still alive. I didn't know who.
They had an unknown serial killer on their hands, and a 3-year-old survivor had to wait 37 years to find the man who murdered her family and almost killed her. You are such a genuine gem. It is Oddtober. Thank you so much for being here. I've had such a wonderful spooky season with you, and I cannot wait for what is to come in the following months. I hope that you stick around. If you haven't already, go ahead and sign up for the Genuine Gem newsletter to make sure that you are getting the uploads every single week, because sometimes YouTube doesn't like to do it. And also, you will get case updates and community news. There's just so much to come, so go ahead and sign up down below. Promise I won't spam you. But today's Genuine Gem shout out is from Lori Curbo. She wants to shout out Cindy Gosling, a single mom of 3 who went missing on September 15th of this year from San Antonio, Texas. You guys really seem to be enjoying the Genuine Gem shoutouts and being able to feature different cases and different organizations. So if you would like to continue this and to have another Genuine Gem in the next video, go ahead and comment down below a case or an organization you think deserves attention, and I will pick from there. So it was 1984, and the Bennett family were living in Aurora. Now this was 27-year-old Bruce and his 26-year-old wife Deborah, and their 2 kids who were 7-year-old Melissa and 3-year-old Vanessa. Now they lived in Aurora in this lovely family home that they had just moved into. They were happy, they were loving. Bruce was actually in the U.S. Air Force, and then he married Deborah, and together they were working at a local furniture warehouse. It was actually a family business that they ran together. They did well for themselves. They had bought this whole new home for their family, and they were said to work very, very hard, and then they stayed at home with their family at night. They were leading a very quiet, peaceful life. Bruce had also enrolled in the local college, training to be an air traffic controller with an eye towards getting a job at the airport. But on January 16th of 1984, neither would show up to work at their furniture warehouse. Now this was very odd considering this was a family business, but also because the family had seen Bruce and Deborah the night before. You see, Bruce's mother Connie and Bruce's 2 brothers had headed over to their home for Melissa's birthday party. They had a wonderful time. They all left by around 9 p.m. because everyone had to work the next day. But now Bruce and Deborah were not coming to work, and they also were not answering their phone. Bruce's mother, Connie, began to call them, getting no answer, so she ended up going to their home and found the garage door open and the door to their home ajar. Now, both cars were still in the driveway, so Connie entered this residence, and that is when she would find her son's body at the base of the staircase.
When I drove up, the garage door was open, and then Deborah's purse was strewn in the front yard.
He was covered in blood, and when the Aurora Police Department arrived, they found even more bodies. Detective Marvin Brandt arrived to find bloody footprints heading to the door. And now Bruce was found lying on his back with his feet toward the staircase as though he had fallen down. He had blunt force trauma to his head and a cut all the way across his throat. A bloody handprint was also found on the wall on the staircase, and so it was theorized that the attack of Bruce began at the top before Bruce tumbled down, and he ended up breaking some of the spindles on the staircase before getting to the bottom and passing away. Now, investigators from the Aurora Police Department claimed as soon as they entered the home and they headed up these bloodied stairs, they could smell the fear in the home. They described it as a slaughterhouse. They got upstairs to the master bedroom and found Deborah beside the bed, covered in blood and twisted up in their bloodied bedding. She was naked from the waist up, and she was wearing her underwear. She was lying in a pool of her own blood. One of her teeth was actually found across the room from her. It had been theorized that Deborah had been pulled down out of her bed and hit in the head several times. She was missing several teeth, and her jaw was broken. Drawers in this bedroom were also open and rifled through, but that wasn't the last of this horrific scene, because this couple had 2 daughters. As police entered another bedroom, they found a bloodied pile of bedding on the floor, and underneath that bedding was the body of 7-year-old Melissa Bennett. She was on her back with her hands above her head as though they were forced to be there. On her hands, she had cuts that appeared to be defense wounds, and her pajamas had been cut off at the waist, and her legs were spread open. It was believed she had been sexually assaulted. Her skull was caved in and brain matter was visible, but there was another small bed in that bedroom. She had shared a room with her sister. On that bed, an even smaller body was found, but between the bed, mattress, and the wall. This was 3-year-old Vanessa Bennett, and she was also covered in blood.
And I heard one of the ambulance people say, there's one still alive. I didn't know who,
Vanessa.
She was alive, but barely, and the teddy bear next to her had been splattered with blood, and there were fragments of her teeth found on it as well. As Vanessa was taken to Children's Mercy, investigators were taking photos. They were bagging evidence along with moving the bodies for autopsy. And when they did so, they found under Melissa's body, that 7-year-old girl, was a knife. And in the master bedroom with Deborah, there was a bloody outline of what appeared to be a hammer, but the hammer wasn't located. The autopsies revealed that Deborah's cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and Bruce and Melissa's cause of death was blunt force trauma as well as sharp force injuries consistent with a knife. Nobody was sure that Vanessa was going to survive, but she was the sole survivor in her family. Now, investigators found what appeared to be quite a bit of evidence that they could use to catch this killer at the home, with the possible fingerprints that they found, and they also found what they believed to be semen on the bedding, specifically in Melissa's room. They also found blood believed not to belong to the victims on the carpet, as well as semen, and so they ended up cutting up these pieces of carpet to take in for analysis. So they sent everything in, but DNA was not yet an investigative method. So they just kept all of this evidence, hoping that one day it would be useful. Now, especially after they found Deborah, the mother's purse outside of the home dumped out, they began to believe that this could have been a burglary gone wrong. A butcher knife was also found in the snow outside in the front yard, and this knife matched a set that belonged in the Bennett's family kitchen. But Bruce's mother, Connie, was as if anything in the home appeared to be missing, as well as in Deborah's purse that had everything laid out outside. And Connie said she didn't believe anything was missing. Bruce's brothers would come forward to investigators saying that someone could have entered through that garage of their home, because when these brothers had left the family party for Melissa's birthday the night prior, they had noticed that the garage door was open. And so one of them had actually gone in and told Bruce, "Hey, brother, the garage door is still open. You should probably shut that." And they did not know if he actually remembered to do so or not. Then the fingerprints that were located in the home could not be matched to anyone. And so with no suspect, the city of Aurora placed security as their #1 priority. Garage doors were double checked, locks were used when they never had been before, and people were seen actually purchasing not only guns and knives, but also helmets, because they feared that their heads would be bashed in as well while they were sleeping.
They bought this house only about 3-4 weeks ago. They're good people, I don't understand what happened.
Meanwhile, little Vanessa was in the hospital. She was in a coma. She had a shattered jaw. Her skull was fractured. Her legs and her arms were injured. She had a shattered pelvis due to the fact that she was sexually assaulted as well. And when Vanessa finally came to in the hospital, she couldn't remember much. She remembered her family, she remembered her home, but she didn't really remember the attack, although she was only 3, about 4 at this time, and didn't really know how to communicate what she was thinking or feeling. But she had to learn how to do everything once again, including walking. Her grandparents, so Bruce's parents, including Connie, took her in, and they were talking to her about her family, saying, her mom was Deborah, her dad was Bruce, she had a sister named Melissa, but they did not tell her what happened to them. She was only 3 after all, and the fact that she maybe didn't remember was possibly a good thing for her healing process at this time.
It's possible that she could be left with
significant permanent injury. It's too early to tell.
Vanessa is making such good progress, and she's going to be okay. We thank God.
Please help find these people so nobody else has to go through this.
But this was not the only crime that had gone unsolved in Aurora around this same time. The same year, in 1984, another couple had been attacked in their home. The Hobbitschilds, Jim and Kim, had called 911 around 2:30 in the morning of January 4th about a man standing over their bed with a hammer. This was 12 days before the Bennett family had been found murdered in their home. Kim claimed that she had woken up in pain and she was startled to see a figure at the foot of their bed. When she began to call out for her husband Jim, telling him about the man in their home, this man then flung the hammer at her, hitting her in the head. As the man ran out of the room and out of the home, they tried to chase him. Jim was chasing him down. Kim ended up feeling sweat going in her eyes, not realizing it was blood at the time, and she was calling 911. Now, when the officers arrived, they found both of the members of this couple bleeding from the head. Jim actually had a skull fracture, and they were rushed to the hospital as investigators did their work at the crime scene. Investigators would find no sign of forced entry at this home. However, the garage door had been left open, and the door from the garage to the home was unlocked. Once investigators got inside, they actually found the weapon, a bloodied hammer used on the victims. It was a claw hammer, and this was one that many families would keep just for everyday use. But while everything was dusted for fingerprints, none were found of this attacker. But they were able to locate footprints in the Colorado snow that led to this home and then went all the way to the neighbor's porch. When they spoke to the neighbor allowed investigators inside to look around the home and look for evidence, and they did not believe the attacker actually got inside of the neighbor's home and went elsewhere. There was also a set of footprints that went from the Hobbitschild's residence to a purse. It was believed that Kim's purse had been stolen and everything was just scattered on the ground as well. Now, these footprints would end up going to a high trafficked area, and so they lost the trail of this attacker. But later they would find that the evidence in Kim's purse that was all over in the snow meant that nothing had been stolen from her purse. While this attack appeared to be a burglary, again, nothing was stolen. So when Kim and Jim were stable at the hospital, investigators began to ask them more questions about that night. Jim said he had been up since about 2 a.m. making a mixtape and finally went to bed, and he and Kim forgot to shut the garage door. When he finally went to bed, he woke up and realized that he was hurting and his hand was swelling.
I heard Kim screaming, "Wake up, there's some man trying to hit us with a hammer."
He believed that he had actually put his hand up and blocked the hammer that was coming down on him, but it had ended up hitting the side of his head anyway. Once Kim was hit, they said the man began to run, and Kim remembered that he was actually quite a large man. Now, they did not believe that their neighbor, whose house the footsteps led up to, had anything to do with it, and then they were shown the weapon used, the hammer that was found in their home, and that hammer did not belong to them. It had been brought by the attacker and left behind. Kim believed that their attacker had been watching them prior to the attack and was still watching them since he hadn't been caught. 5 days later, the Aurora police were still searching for a perpetrator when another attack occurred. This was at yet another Aurora home, and 28-year-old Donna Holm would be attacked. This was in the late hours of January 9th or the early morning of January 10th. Donna was headed home after a shift as a flight attendant, and she was waiting to meet her boyfriend Ron at their home. So before she headed home, she'd actually stopped at the grocery store, and then she paused in the driveway to grab her mail. She had just gone inside. Nobody in the neighborhood had heard anything. But when Ron arrived in the early morning hours, he would find blood on the garage doorstep, and as he rushed inside, he found Donna lying in their bed, bleeding profusely from a hole in her head, and she was groaning, but she was unable to communicate. Now, Ron immediately called 911 and Donna was rushed to the hospital, but Ron was forced to stay back because they believed he was responsible. He was their prime suspect at this point. Investigators actually found a huge pool of blood in the garage next to Donna's car, and blood was located on her car seats, and that is where a bloodied hammer was found as well. At the hospital, it was found that Donna had been beaten with a hammer and sexually assaulted. Thankfully, she survived to tell her story. Donna said that after she had pulled into the garage and opened the door to her car, she was immediately struck in the temple. Again, the hammer that she was shown that was left behind did not belong to her or to Ron. Investigators had ruled out Ron completely, and they believed that after Donna was hit, she had been placed on the garage floor where she was sexually assaulted and was left there bleeding out for hours. The doctors would tell Donna that she would not have survived if it hadn't been cold outside. The coldness had allowed her blood to coagulate and allowed her not to fully bleed to death. Her boyfriend Ron slept at the foot of her hospital bed with a gun that he had recently purchased in order to protect her because he believed the attacker was going to come back when he realized the newspaper was saying that she had survived. Donna would suffer extreme memory loss. She did not remember the attack. Some brief memories would come back every once in a while, but she was so lost about what had happened to her that investigators had actually come and began to tell her a story about a woman that had been attacked, and Donna began crying for this woman because it was so horrific what had happened to her. And that is when investigators told her, Donna, that happened to you. Now, later this same day of the attack on Donna on January 10th, a 50-year-old named Patricia Smith was at the home that she shared with her daughter and her grandkids in Lakewood. Now, this was about 30 minutes from Aurora, Colorado. Patricia had moved in with her daughter, Sherry, to help with the kids because Sherry was going through a divorce. Sherry would say that her mom was so wonderful. She was always positive. She was a great mother. She was a great businesswoman, too. She did interior design around the state. And so every single morning, Patricia would drop her daughter off at the park and ride for work, and Sherry would ride the bus and go to work. And so she did this just like normal on January 10th. But when Sherry was supposed to be picked up from the park and ride, her mother Patricia was not there, and she was never late. They had to go and pick up the kids from daycare after this. So Patricia was always on time. So Sherry knew something was wrong. She ended up getting a ride from another one of the family members. They picked up the kids, and when they got home, they noticed that the downstairs was dark, but there appeared to be a TV light coming from Patricia's bedroom upstairs. So they didn't really know what was going on. They noticed that the garage door was open as well, and Sherry remembered that her mother had said she was going to run some errands that day after dropping her off. But Patricia's car was in the garage, and so as they entered the home, Patricia's grandchildren would actually be the first to see her, and they would find her lying on the ground about 6 feet away from the entrance, and a Winnie the Pooh blanket that belonged to her grandchildren was draped over her head. Sherry instantly knew that someone had killed her mother. She rushed her children outside to the neighbors, and she called for help. Patricia was found to be semi-nude with her bra and shirt pushed up to her neck, and when the blanket was removed from her head, a bloodied hammer was located. Investigators believe that as soon as Patricia entered the home that day after dropping off her daughter, she was attacked by a perpetrator laying in wait. Patricia's wallet and purse were scattered and were rummaged through as well, and there was a fast food bag of food that was half eaten in the living room, and the receipt found showed that it had been purchased that day around 1 p.m. So investigators believe that Patricia had been killed around 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Patricia's autopsy would show she'd been hit over the head 17 times with a blunt object believed to be that hammer, and her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. She had also been sexually assaulted. Sherry was questioned by the police about the possible enemies that would have motive to do this to her mother, and Sherry actually gave the police 4 names of people that her mother Patricia knew back in their home state of Nebraska who might have some problems with her. So they investigated these individuals, and none had evidence that they were ever even in Colorado. So another attack went unsolved. Now, while investigators in Colorado were aware that these crimes were very similar, different detectives were assigned to each case, and there was no collaboration between them until this time of the Bennett family murders. The community was in an uproar, they were terrified, and when investigators began to piece these crimes together, it pointed to a possible serial killer. All of these crime scenes also had one thing in common. They were all homes next to construction builds. It was theorized that their killer could be a construction worker, which is why he used a hammer as his weapon. So at this point, an FBI profiler was brought on the case, and they found that this was a man who killed every week for the last 3 weeks in the same area and possibly would continue this pattern. So on January 23rd, this FBI agent arrived in Colorado in order to search the Bennett family crime scene and investigate the possible connections, and the profile was then made. This was believed to be a person who looked for opportunity. If a garage door was open, if a lock was unlocked, he would enter, attacking immediately. But if it was any way difficult to get into this home, he would just find another one. He would also burglarize his victims, but only take low-value items such as a few dollars in cash. He was sloppy and unsophisticated and believed to be a white male in his 20s, not college educated. But the most concerning part was that he was believed to be one to continue to kill until he was arrested or dead. But this FBI profiler said this man was not a criminal mastermind, just an average burglar who had evolved into a predator. That he was psycho. He was not looking for a particular victim. He was just looking for people in general. So as the names of these different construction workers who had worked on builds near these crime scenes were obtained, investigators found a huge problem in the fact that most of these construction companies kept very loose paperwork on their men. They often did not have all of the documents and identification needed. So investigators in Aurora used the FBI profile to try to match to one of these construction men, but there simply was not enough information. They asked if there was any unexplained absences or maybe people who had left the job altogether around these times. However, nothing of substance was being found. The survivors and the victims' families were slowly losing hope that anyone would find this man who had been given the moniker the Hammer Killer. Now, Detective Marvin Brandt took over these cases and began diving deeper into these investigations. Eventually, the blood on the carpet in the Bennett family home was identified as type A, but it didn't lead anywhere further. And so Detective Brandt said he was not going to give up that easily. So he was digging through the physical evidence from all the way back in 1984, and he found something the original investigators had missed. On the pajamas of 7-year-old Melissa Bennett that she was wearing the night she was murdered, there was a singular pubic hair. This was a long and blonde hair, and it was going to be a tricky situation because there was a singular hair, meaning that they had one chance to test this. So the lab actually told Detective Brandt that they should try to clone it in order to make sure that they had the evidence and it wasn't destroyed. However, this was a risky process. They all knew that, and this process would end up disintegrating the only real piece of evidence they had. So on March 1st of 2001, 17 years after these attacks and murders, DNA from the Bennett family crime scene was entered into CODIS. This was a brand new thing, but there was no match. And so for 34 years, the Hammer Killer went identified. In 2002, the Aurora Police Department were able to obtain an arrest warrant for the unknown killer based on his DNA. Then in 2010, the Aurora Police announced that the DNA had a link between the Bennett family murders and Patricia Smith's murder. They knew that this singular man had at least attacked those two individuals and that these were connected. But they still didn't get a match to that DNA. So in 2016, they actually used age-progressed DNA phenotyping to get images of the possible suspect based on his DNA. They did one image of what he would have looked like at the time of the murders and another for his appearance at that point. Now, there were survivors in this case, but they were really struggling, especially with their attacker still out there. Survivors Kim and Jim, they would move out of their home soon after they attacked. They were not sleeping well at all because anytime they heard a noise, they would be up for the rest of the night. They also feared being in public because they didn't know who it was that attacked him. He could be right in front of their faces and they would have no idea. They were essentially telling themselves that this man was dead just so they could live their lives. Survivor Donna Holm had to go through a serious healing journey, but her boyfriend Ron was by her side and proposed to her during that time. Ron would say that he never lost faith in his wife, that she was an amazing person, and she would say he had never let her feel sorry for herself. He would just make her laugh instead, and they are just such a beautiful, strong couple.
He asked me out 2 years before we started dating.
And the second time I asked her out if she wanted to play racquetball, because I was a good racquetball player.
I don't do
She
sports.
said no.
Finally.
Daddy asked me out actually for drinks.
Yes.
I can handle that. Normal. I know I'm safe. I'm home. I reach and grab the mail, swing the door open, and that's where my memory goes. It's now erased. When I come to, I'm thinking, I must have really tied one on. But I'm outside of the house trying to get in and falling down, standing up, falling down.
Into the bedroom, and I saw her laying in bed with all this blood.
In the hospital, I say I had the mentality of a 2-year-old. Everything was new to me. Once again, I didn't know a knife and fork. I couldn't even tell you that I can't open my mouth and how hard it is to eat. You always felt like, is it him? Does he recognize me? Is he going to come after me again?
My efforts were not to hate him specifically, although he's an evil person. My efforts went towards helping Donna recover and being there for her.
But survivor Vanessa Bennett, the 3-year-old little girl, had grown up, and she would explain that she was often suicidal. She began to use drugs to cope with the pain. She believed that everyone deserved to have parents and didn't understand why she couldn't. She was struggling with addiction and homelessness. This was not an easy life for Vanessa.
I have a metal plate in my forehead. I had frontal lobe issues because I was hitting the hammer. My skull kind of breaks right here. My jaw pretty much is shattered. I had a tracheotomy here. I have a shattered pelvis, but I guess I healed pretty well. I was made fun of in school because my parents were killed. I was made fun of because the hammerman, or whatever you want to call it, was gonna come to my house and hurt everybody when I had slumber parties and stuff. I was made fun of for a long time. I remember a lot of my life I was angry because why did I have to be the only one that lived? Why did my parents die? They were great people. And then I turned out being a junkie, you know? And I always thought, you know, they were good people. You know, what did they do wrong? They didn't do anything. You know, they were young. They were in their mid-20s.
Are you hopeful about the future?
I am. I have big things planned, and I know it sounds like it's a little late because I'm 38 years old, but it's never too late. You know?
But something that all of these survivors had in common was the fact that they knew they deserved justice and that they would feel a lot safer if this man was behind bars. And then in 2018, Detective Marvin Brandt was retired, but he would get a call that CODIS finally had a match to the DNA they had entered years prior.
We are holding today's press conference to provide updated information about the 1984 cold case murders of the Bennett family and Patricia Smith.
Just shy of 4 years ago, I arrived to Aurora from Seattle, and one of my first orders of business was to ask our major crimes unit to give me a rundown of any cold cases that we had in process. And this was one of the cases that they provided information for to me. It was obvious that our detectives, those who were on the case still and those who had retired, it was a case that they were not giving up on and were continuing to move forward on. It was obvious that this case haunted our detectives and officers who responded that night and who continued to work forward on processing and investigating. It was a case that haunted the families and the victims to the core. This is why, as we are preparing this press conference today, that we have asked not only the detectives who who have continued to work this investigation on a regular basis to be here with us today, but we've also asked our retired detectives to be here because this is a case, as I've said before, was something that shocked the conscience of our community and something that our detectives, retired and current, were not willing to give up on. When I received the call from Director John Camper from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation just a few short weeks ago and was told the results of the DNA results, it sent a chill through my spine. And as I told folks in our office about the information we had received, there was a great deal of elation in knowing that we possibly had that suspect identity known and hopefully in custody. And it was really clear that even for officers who had come on well after the murder of the Bennett family, it was something that they too felt was a great news to get at that time. Just a day or two after receiving word of the DNA results, we met with the family members and victims and family members of this suspect. And it was obvious in talking with them that there was no closure. There's been no closure. And these murders have not only destroyed the lives of those who were killed, but it's destroyed the lives of those who are still with us today.
My name's George Brockler. I am the District Attorney for the 18th Judicial District. That includes Arapahoe County, where you are right now, where this crime was committed, and Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln counties. 12,626 evenings ago, the Bennett family of four, 27-year-old Bruce, 26-year-old Deborah, and their two daughters, celebrated the 7th birthday of one of those girls. At that birthday celebration was Bruce's mother, Connie. Next day, Connie came over to the house to discover that the family had been reduced to one, the 3-year-old, who was still alive but suffering serious injuries. Today represents the first public and formal step on what will prove to be a long journey towards justice in this case. Now, if we're going to achieve justice in this case, as with all cases in our system, it is important that I tell you, and I tell you it is important that you report to the public, that no matter what you hear here today, no matter what you discover on your own, no matter what you read in this affidavit, that this individual is presumed innocent and must be presumed innocent until such time as he may be convicted beyond a reasonable doubt. A matter of significance to me was in trying to bring to justice those people who have committed the most heinous acts against violations of our law, murder, and see that they didn't escape culpability. But back in 2002, based on the ever-changing DNA technology, and make no mistake, DNA is what brings us into this room today, there was a series of charges that were filed by my predecessor's predecessor in the DA's office, 18 separate counts. Those counts were attributed to a John Doe profile that has since been changed to reflect the individual that now stands accused of these particular charges. And those 18 charges include 6 counts of first-degree murder, 7 other substantive counts, and 5 what we'll call sentence enhancer counts of crimes of violence. Some may ask, how is it that you have 6 counts of first-degree murder and only 3 victims? That is because there are 2 different theories of culpability on murder. One is after deliberation with intent. The other is based on a felony murder theory.
It's been over 34 years that the search for the killer, Patricia Smith, never ended. Yesterday, we presented an affidavit that detailed recitation of facts that we believe supported probable cause to ask for a warrant for the arrest of Alexander Christopher Ewing, currently in custody in Nevada. Our request for a warrant detailed that we believe Mr. Ewing is responsible for the murder and assault on Patricia Smith. This is a time not only to pursue justice, to step back and once again remember Patricia Smith and her family. Justice in this case has been delayed, but I'm confident that justice is not going to be denied. It's also a message, I think, to all family members and loved ones of victims who've gone through the tragedy of experiencing a murder that we say has turned cold. The work of the men and women and the organizations that are represented by the men and women standing behind me indicates, exemplifies, and proves that these individuals are not forgotten. And it should serve as a warning to those who may have committed these crimes that we are still out here. We are still looking. We are still working. And if you are responsible, ultimately, we'll find you.
Look, to the extent that what you're recording here is going to go outside the state of Colorado, look, every state in this country has unsolved cases. Some less serious, some as serious, some more serious. If you are one of those handful of states, Montana, that doesn't have the DNA law that we have, that Nevada now has, pass this, do this for the victims of those cases that are still hanging out there wondering if they'll ever get justice on their cases. I promise you, if you do this, you have the opportunity to help bring some closure to people who have these gaping holes in their lives from crimes that have not yet been solved.
This man that matched the DNA of the Bennett family murders and Patricia Smith's murder was a man named Alex Christopher Ewing. You see, this man had his DNA in the database because he was an inmate in Nevada. He was already behind bars for an attempted murder that happened in 1984. That's right, the same year as all of those other murders that investigators knew about and were connecting. But instead, this attempted murder happened in August instead of July and in Nevada instead of Colorado. On August 9th of 1984, Alex Ewing had entered the home of Chris and Nancy Berry in Henderson, Nevada. He would proceed to attack them in their sleep with an axe handle. The couple was then found in their master bedroom with blood everywhere. Nancy's arms were broken and Chris was beat severely. Now, they were still alive, but barely, and they didn't know if the attacker was still in their home. This was so important to them because they had 2 children, and they didn't know if their 2-year-old and their infant were okay. Nancy said she had heard a noise in the middle of the night, and she got up and found a man in the middle of the kitchen. She screamed. She ran towards the bedroom where Chris, her husband, was sleeping. The man followed behind her and began attacking them with an axe. Nancy tried to reach for the phone as the man was attacking her husband, but then she was hit as well. She ended up playing dead and the man fled. The babies were found alive and unharmed, and they were watched by family members as Nancy and Chris were taken to the hospital for their injuries. The only evidence at this crime scene was footprints. You see, the Henderson Police Department went to all of the different homes in the neighborhood asking if they had seen this man, if he was possibly in their home. They used helicopters and canines, and Alex Ewing's mugshot was sent out to the public because they believed that this escaped convict was involved. That's right, he was in prison and had escaped and had attacked another couple. They ended up locating him at a payphone when the operator realized who he was and called the police. When the police arrived, Alex Ewing began to run, and then he would finally surrender. So on February 28th of 1985, he was found guilty of the attempted murder and sentenced to 100 years. But like I said, Alex Ewing was an escaped convict during the time of that attack. So what was he in prison for? Well, prior to Chris and Nancy Berry's attack, on January 27th of 1984, that's right, 11 days after the Bennett family had been killed in Colorado, he had attacked a man in Arizona. This was Roy Williams, who would say that he woke up to a man hitting him over the head with a rock. He was hitting him in the head when he was asleep, and Roy woke up, asked the man why he was doing this, and the man then ran. He had snuck in the back door with a 25-pound rock, and just like with all of the other hammer attacks that occurred in the dark, so Roy was unable to describe him for a sketch. However, there was a shoe print in Roy's front yard, and so investigators in Arizona put out an APB about this man, and 7 hours later, an officer driving down an interstate near Roy's home would find a hitchhiker. They would pull him over, they would ask him about the bottom of his shoes, and the hitchhiker held up a shoe and showed the exact same tread as the footprint found at Roy's home. So the officer began to ask the hitchhiker if he would come down to the station, and that's when the hitchhiker fled. After a pursuit, the hitchhiker had been found hiding in the bushes. This was none other than Alex Ewing, a 23-year-old at that time. He was charged with attempted murder and burglary of Roy. However, the county jail where he was arrested was so overcrowded that he was sent out of state for trial. He would be there for the next 9 months. Then he would suddenly be a free man, but not because he was found not guilty and released. You see, on August 9th of 1984, Alex had been placed into a transportation vehicle heading to Nevada. They stopped at a gas station for a bathroom break where they would allow the prisoners to be uncuffed to do their business. This would be when Alex would make a run for it, and the Henderson, Nevada police had to be called. However, they did not know that he was in prison for attempted murder. They just knew about the burglary. So an escaped prisoner was a priority to them, but they didn't realize how dangerous he could be, and they could not locate him. The community in Henderson, Nevada was actually making calls about seeing him. One woman called 911 saying that a man tried to get into her home, saying that he was going to tow her car. He fit Alex's description. Another woman called 911 frantic. She was saying a man entered their home while they were asleep and hit her and her husband in the head with a club. They were all bleeding out and going to die. She was asking for them to hurry. When they arrived at this home, they could actually hear the screaming from inside. This was the home of Chris and Nancy Berry. Alex Ewing had attacked this couple when he was on the run from his prison sentence for another attack. That meant that if this man had committed all of these attacks and murders, he had attacked 6 different families, killing 4 people: Deborah, Bruce, and Melissa Bennett, as well as Patricia Smith. Back then, still in 1984, when Alex Ewing was arrested for Roy Williams' attack and then was arrested for Nancy and Chris Berry's attack, DNA was yet to be taken from inmates and CODIS was yet to exist. So it wasn't until 2018, when CODIS caught up with the DNA in the prison systems, that they finally found a match to these attacks and murders. You see, in 2013, the Nevada law began requiring DNA from anyone arrested in the state for a felony charge, and it was applied retroactively to inmates in 2016. But just as the Colorado police believed they had caught their hammer killer, they found that he was up for parole for the attack on the Berrys in Nevada. His hearing was scheduled for July 27th, but thankfully it was postponed, so investigators in Colorado rushed to Nevada to question him in August of 2018. Now, investigators did not tell Alex why they were there, but wanted Alex to tell them where he had been throughout his life, and he admitted to being in Aurora for about a year and working different construction jobs, just like the FBI profile had predicted. They then began showing him photos of Patricia Smith, and he said he didn't recognize her. But then they showed him a photo of the crime scene of her body, and he jumped back in his chair and said, "There's got to be a mistake." Then that's when investigators decided to announce why they were really there to talk to him, and Alex Ewing was said to explode. He was 57 years old at this time, and his arrest record showed that he had arrests dating back to 1979 for burglary, starting when he was about 17 years old. However, his childhood is greatly unknown. Survivor Vanessa was called when the DNA was found to be a match to Alex Ewing, and she was told that her family's killer had been caught. She was actually living under a bridge at this time. Survivor Donna Holm made a statement after Alex's arrest saying, "This past week has been a time of reflection and deep sense of appreciation for those many people who worked tirelessly over the past 34 years to find justice for the victims and families who were damaged by this individual. I'm elated that this person who continued his violent path in another state has spent these years in prison and feel confident that this will continue. I was fortunate that I was able to move forward with my life through the love and support of my husband, my family, and friends. I'm at peace with my life and glad that those lost loved ones can bring a measure of closure to their loss. But due to the statute of limitations, for 34 years, instead of being charged for the attacks and the assaults, the murders were the only charges strong enough to actually hold up. So he was charged with the murders of the Bennett family and the murder of Patricia Smith. And for the next few years, he actually fought extradition, but finally he was brought back to Colorado. However, at this point, the judge blocked the evidence that Alex was responsible for all of these different attacks. They were not able to mention that in court. They were only allowed to talk about the Bennett family murders and Patricia Smith's murder. Patricia's family stated 34 years of mystery, sadness, grief, and fear has finally come to a point of a foreseeable and hopeful conclusion for my family and me. We are also relieved that this suspect has been behind bars for almost the duration of that period, and the DNA testing was completed before his impending release date. It is difficult to imagine how much more fulfilling our lives would have been if Patricia Smith's life had not been taken from us. It is more difficult to imagine her death remaining a mystery. There is some relief. Patricia Smith was a beacon of light for our family and a vibrant inspiration of love and laughter to everyone she met. She is missed dearly. So the Bennett family murder trial was first, and the defense was claiming that the DNA was contaminated back in 1984 because the police did not know what they were doing, that they then destroyed the pubic hair that would have proven that Alex was not their man in the Bennett family murders, and that basically the Aurora Police Department investigations were shoddy, and that most of the items touched by the perpetrator in the home were not actually tested for DNA, including a knife and a purse in the front yard. The defense then told the jurors, simple is what the government needs you to believe. The jury was then shown a 20-minute video of the crime scene, a home covered in blood. Detectives who had worked this case testified that after they collected the blood evidence, they allowed some of the bedding to dry in storage so that the fabric would not become moldy. The defense then claimed that this was mixed in with all of the evidence at the police department from other cases and it was contaminated. The detectives were then claiming that there was too much evidence against Alex, including a piece of carpet they had taken from the Bennett family home which found sperm that matched with Alex's genetic profile, as well as sperm that matched him that was on the comforter placed over 7-year-old Melissa's body. The DA said that you cannot outrun the march of science, the march of progress. Connie Bennett, Bruce's mother, would also testify, and she would talk about how Melissa's birthday party was her 8th birthday the night before. Connie had brought her granddaughter an Oregon, and they ate cake and ice cream together, and she went home not knowing she would be back the next day to find the family murdered. She said that some of the dishes from the party were still in the kitchen, and the first thing that Connie noticed about her son was that his forehead seemed to be crushed in. She fell to her knees at the sight of her son and asked him, "Bruce, what happened?" even though she knew he couldn't answer. She said that taking care of 3-year-old Vanessa at the hospital was blurry because it was such a horrendous thing to see a child in that condition. The 911 call from Connie was then played for the court. And when Vanessa listened, she said it was so weird because she knew her grandma Connie as the person who was always in control. But that day she found her son, she didn't even know their home address because they had just moved in. Vanessa said it was very unsettling to listen to. Vanessa would also briefly testify, but she had no memory of the attack. After 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury was at a standstill and they told the judge, "We are at an impasse with virtually no possibility for agreement." The judge told them to go home, get some rest, and deliberate again the next day. The defense was requesting a mistrial after this, but this was denied, and the next day by lunch, the jury found Alex Ewing guilty of all counts. He showed no emotion, and at his sentencing hearing, Vanessa would read an impact statement to the court saying, "I didn't just lose my parents and sister. I lost trust in people. I lost my dignity. I lost my pride. I lost the person who I was supposed to be. I lost my sanity." She was consumed with emotions as she read. And then in August of 2021, Alex Ewing was finally sentenced to 3 life sentences to run consecutively. And after 37 years, the Hammer killer was finally identified and the attacks and the murders were solved. Survivor Vanessa told A&E that she takes full responsibility for the choices that she's made in her life, and that despite everything, her extremely hard life, she remains a very upbeat person who gets easily excited and she loves to laugh. She also feels very compelled to tell her story because it's a part of her healing process. Vanessa would go around to women's groups and tell them that if she could get through all of this, they could too. She still has many effects from the attacks though, including paralysis on the left side of her body. She can't tell whether she's holding on to something or letting it go. She has a metal plate in her forehead, and she said that when she was young, she didn't really talk about what happened to anyone, but she was made fun of by all of the kids for the way that she looked. They would always ask her what happened to her face. All she knew was that she couldn't sleep very well, and she was always angry. In fact, her grandmother sent her to boarding school in high school after she attempted to take her life. She was diagnosed with PTSD, borderline personality disorder, ADHD, and bipolar disorder. She began getting into drinking and smoking weed in high school, and then she got pregnant with her son. She had a healthy baby, but then she started doing cocaine and heroin at 19, and that baby was taken from her at 3 months old. From there, Vanessa had a very hard time keeping a job due to her PTSD and bipolar, keeping her from being able to sleep. She said she struggled to manage her time and her organizational skills. She was often homeless, living under bridges with her boyfriends. They would have to go to hospitals to wash their hair. She was thrown in jail multiple different times for crimes such as shoplifting, assault, domestic violence, trespassing, drug possession. And the year that Vanessa finally heard that her family's killer had been caught, in 2018, that's the year she began to heal. And she actually met her son for the first time since she had been forced to give him up. They now talk on the phone, and Vanessa also has 2 girls who live with her family. But that 3-year-old survivor was 42 years old by this point. She is now clean and sober, living in Arizona with her second husband. When asked if she has memories of her family, she said she doesn't. She has memories of the house and a Pink Panther installation, but that was because they had moved into this house not too long before the attacks. It was this brand new thing. She said she doesn't know if she wants to remember though. She's been offered hypnotherapy, and she almost did it when the killer was still unknown to help find her killer. But she also didn't want it to bring out anything that could potentially make her worse. Vanessa says that even to this day, she is very wobbly physically. Her ankles are forever damaged, and her mental anguish has been even worse. Vanessa was asked by A&E if she felt any relief that the Hammer killer was caught, and she said not really, that her life had already been ruined, the damage had already been done. But she said that by the age of 30, she stopped being a victim, and she turned it into being a survivor. Her dream is to buy a house. She wants to write a book and help people struggling with addiction just like her. She said that with writing, she feels like she can actually feel in between the emotions that she's going through when she puts it on paper rather than just talking about it. When asked if something about her story could help others, Vanessa said, "Everybody throughout my life asked me how I could go on without my parents. For me, it's my will to live. My will to live was so strong that I never gave up, especially as an adult. In any situation, I don't give up." But what about justice for Patricia Smith? Well, Alex Ewing went to trial for her murder in 2021, but this was declared a mistrial because the judge agreed to the defense's request for a competency evaluation. Alex Ewing then passed this evaluation, but her family was devastated at this. I mean, her own grandchildren remembered finding their grandmother with their blanket covering her face. They were demanding justice. Even though this man would be behind bars forever, they wanted justice for Patricia. And they would finally get that on April 7th of 2022 when he was convicted of the first-degree murder and sentenced to life. Alex Ewing addressed the court saying that the system was rigged and law enforcement dismissed his attempts to lead them to the people who actually committed these attacks. He said, "Your Honor, I've got a lot of issues right now. I would like to say to the court about this, but I've been treated so unfairly even before I was dragged to this state. The unfairness when I have given information out that could possibly lead to an alternate suspect, I'm told basically to be quiet. Prosecutors here and in Arapahoe are just going to twist it around. You guys don't want the people who actually committed the crimes, you just want the conviction." But he also said he was not going to testify because he did not want the attorneys to twist it around and that they rigged the entire thing. Now, Alex has been found to also set up an online dating profile while he's in prison for life. So one of his profiles was actually exposed by the Las Vegas Journal, and Alex described himself as a rugged outdoorsman who liked camping, old cars, old movies, and animals. He wrote that he was no saint and he was looking for a woman who was in her 50s to become a pen pal, but not to support him financially, just to give him something to look forward to with their letters. Do you believe that if Alex Ewing is ever released, he will continue to commit these murders? I tend to believe so. I think that until this man was placed exactly where he was supposed to be in lockup, he would have been one of the most prolific serial killers. He left survivors, and he still knew how to get away with it for so long because nobody could see his face. He was out of there without anyone able to give a description, even though they had been face to face with him. Truthfully, the reason that he was caught is because he did not know about DNA testing back when he left his DNA all over the crime scene. A lot of these killers didn't even think to cover that up during that time, thankfully. I just worry about crime nowadays that people know that DNA is an investigative method and used so often to catch so many killers. It was the ignorance back then that allowed this man to be locked away. I think Vanessa's story is one of the hardest survivors I've ever covered. She truly went through it her entire life. And I just am so happy to hear that she is thriving now after she got her family justice and herself justice. After this man was locked away, I'm sure that the fear that he would come back was something that crippled her. And so I truly hope that she is just free and happy and living a life of peace, because that is what she deserves. But if you would like to hear more survivor stories, I have an entire playlist down below. I will also have the Oddtober playlist down below if you want some spooky content for this last week of October. Happy Halloween to all of you. Please stay safe when you are out having fun, trick-or-treating, going to different festivities. Just have fun. Be safe. But don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay. Bye.